Greetings. I am recording another of my dreams which I had a few days ago. I usually give my dreams titles, but it was difficult to choose. Anyhow, I go into my dream diary right away. This was one of the most peculiar dreams I ever had. Not so much for the content, but I also dreamed the content of a 600 pages book. I even woke up a few times, fell back asleep, and the dream continued at the same point. The dream began that I was walking through some sort of underground tunnels, like that of a vast futuristic train stations, where trains would head to all sort of places. And feeling lost, I walked around, and suddenly, in a walkway to my right, I saw someone. A young adult man, not too buffed but strong built. He walked by, we being separated by a low wall, and there was a surprise in his expression, and like he did not expect this, he walked faster. He had black hair, and it was apparent he was disguising himself here, but the face I would have recognized under a million of faces. This was a thought I had, and it was strange, because I knew it was Apollon. How would I know his face? I followed him, shouted after him, and he pretended not to hear, until a bulky, tall man with a friendly grin stopped him, and we three suddenly stood together. The bulky man did not have to announce himself either, for I knew he was none other than Heracles. "So, you have arranged this?" asked Apollo to Heracles, which the latter laughed and said, "Yes, it is about time, and he needs it right now." Apollo seemed to think, and then suddenly laughed too, and said, "Yes, you're right." I asked them why they are here, why in modern man's clothing, and they explained, "Most of their kind spend time here, hidden as mortal men right now, and this would have a reason, though I would understand later." Since apparently I was doubtful of what they said, that it was a good reason, we confirmed it to believe it. It must be, they said, the way it is for now. "Let's just say we are busy with something very important. But," Apollo continued, "here is a gift. You get 1 day trying out to be what you will be or could be if you do things right. After all, you're my son." And of course, you'd say I was dumbstruck, only I wasn't, since because he stood there and his face was so familiar. Because I know it was true. From the way he said it, it was apparent the gods had spread their seed, not too seldom, and mostly over many lifetimes in men, it either diminished or grew, and that decided if they would be able to become a demigod 1 day after death, after enough reincarnations, or not, and then just return. So he continued, "Right. You now get 1 day of powers befitting my son, so we see what your powers are, and what kind of person you might be with that power." And then the scenery changed, and I was in a run-down city at night, and some gang was mugging an elderly man, which angered me, and I grabbed their leader out of anger and wished to burn them with fire. But out of my hands, even with the strongest concentration, there just came some warmth or heat, but nothing really that would damage him. The gangster just got a small burn and yelled and asked me what the fuck was that weak attack. And then I heard my father's voice saying, "So apparently the solar fire is not your forte." pity. I like that thing, but I told you years ago you are not the solar type, and I accepted you as priest nonetheless. And somehow, in his presence, the mobsters ran away. In the following scenes, I met a lot of poor and miserable people. One time sitting in a very poor diner, and they pitied them, but they did not know what to do. But there was no comment if I had done right or wrong, just sitting there and watching. When I walked, I came to the house of a man. It was still in this poor district, and inside was a man who had been an inventor. But through some illness he lost his ability to walk, so his legs were useless, and he sat apathetic about his fate in a wheelchair. I did feel pity. But the interesting thing I noticed at that moment was that my mindset was now entirely different from my usual self. And I also noticed that this was a dream. So I could compare this mindset I had now to my regular one. I did feel pity with the man, though it was not as overwhelming as I would as a normal human being. But I also felt he is one of the millions with calamity. Humans come and go like not to waste your powers, or to pick people who will make a difference for humanity at large. But then I saw something like a golden string, like a weaving of fate that this man might invent something important in spacecraft development. And so I walked towards him and placed my hands on his legs and said, "It is going to be all right. Do not be afraid. Just continue your work." And I healed his legs so he could walk, though it wasn't perfect. He would still be slow and weak on the legs, but he began to return to walk, and I knew that I was observed and my decisions were noted. Finally, I told the man to promise me never to tell this to anyone, or millions of people would come to me and I would never find the time to do anything else, and I can't spend eternity always healing everyone, to which he agreed. And I had the impression he was Eastern European. I went through several scenes I cannot remember clearly, all tests of my skills as well as my decisions. At one point I was at a mall, which was a shopping mall, which was very crowded, and it sort of annoyed me, and I found out I could fly, just by wishing it, and it was very exhilarating to feel, and I also could make myself be unnoticed. Not invisible, but kinda like people would forget having seen me immediately, and I understood that is what they do. They make us forget things we are not ready for. And I was then in a rich city, something like Las Vegas or so, and there were many people gambling, but the owner of some gambling hall was so sinister, so I went in and found out that the owner cheated his customers, and I felt enraged over this cheating. I noticed this, and apparently I had a great sense for justice as a part of my nature, and it was strange to take so conscious note about that, since I knew my mindset was different in the dream, and I wanted to know to what extent I was still the same. Inside, some goons tried to prevent me from going to the boss, and I found that my physical strength was way beyond that of a human. I could just beat them with fists and they flew all over. I thought, damn, they must die from that. But then my father's voice appeared again, and he said, no, it's because there is the limiter. The time of death, he explained, is not set by the gods, but by the fates. And even gods cannot go beyond that law, with a few rare exceptions, like when there is a great sacrilege to happen, like the time when the priest before the Trojan War was shamed. And then he said I was free to avenge him and kill his tormentors. But the limiter not to be able to kill a man whose time has not come, is only lifted in sacred affairs. And so I saw, no matter that the blows of my fist would have killed any regular men normally, and did harm them, they were greatly harmed, but none of them died. When I finally came to the casino boss, I could read the evil in his mind, and it enraged me again deeply. I dragged him out to some space, and I grabbed him, and I hurled him with all my might all into the air, the way someone would throw a baseball, and he flew all up to the sky, and without thinking, I threw back my arm and summoned a sort of arrow into my fist, something between the size of an arrow and a spear, only that it was made of lightning, and I threw it at the man in the sky, and I heard the astonished voice of Apollo, so apparently instead of the solar fire you have a bit of your grandfather. Interesting. A very small version, but a version nonetheless. It was again apparent, due to the limiter, I could not kill the man, so I unleashed all my rage, summoned lightning from the sky over and over upon him, torturing him with it until I finally created a lightning arrow again and nailed him to the wall of his casino with it. I just heard the comment that apparently I had the family's wrath as well, but I didn't discern if it was meant as a praise or a critique. His tone was sort of withheld. Walking on, the scenery shifted, and suddenly I stood before the house in which I had lived for 30 years, but apparently this was the future. The house had been derelict, and it was about to be torn down. I felt very sad, since I recalled the many good memories, and I heard my father's voice, Apollo, saying, "That is what you must overcome. You cannot cling to mortal things. It will only bring you pointless grief. It is how their things and their doings are. They are fleeting and fast away in our eyes. We are not without pity for that, but if you attach yourself to their works too much, it will waste you away. Learn to accept that they are not like us, and their world is not like ours. Remember that both, when you want to punish or help, what difference will it really make?" And I saw some people discuss whether they should restore the house or just tear it down, and it was very difficult for me to turn my back on this and move on, but I did. In the next scene there was a rich metropolis, apparently in Russia, and I was invited by some rich Russian oligarch into his manor, and it became clear to me that he somehow knew what I was, a demigod, or maybe a demigod I could be someday, so he never said it. He offered to help me, and let me have many good pleasures if I in return would favor his business, like bless it. Apparently he wanted my blessing for his business, more than my actually doing something for him, so I said, "There is little I can do now." And he grinned and said he knew, but it was a risk investing from that side. If things would go well for me, it would pay off for him. At that point I had the impression the Russian had some seed of a power within him too, in order to recognize me, and I had the impression that many whose soul or lineage comes from a mix of powers and mortals end up either powerful or gifted in some way, though if not nurtured it diminishes over the centuries. Strangely I agreed, and blessed his business fortune, and I told him to be mindful not to kill too many people. I was sort of astonished to feel that way, so while apparently I was moral, I wasn't entirely at the same time. There was a sort of limit to my own goodness. I would not have tolerated to help someone who would be evil, but I could read him that he was not a brutal killer, but he would kill competitors of the same business, meaning other criminals, and since there would always be evil oligarchs, it would be a right choice to give power boost to some of the least brutal of their own over the more brutal one. This time I did not get a comment at all, but I felt sure about my own decision. The oligarch drove me to an island, the Great Lake, a very beautiful hotel on the beach to spend some pleasure time there. I was welcomed by a very beautiful lady, and I laughed at her and said, apparently her boss doesn't know my desires so well, at which she laughed and said, that's okay, we can bring you a guy as well. But I said, no thanks, I just take the dinner and enjoy the area. I flew over the lake, and hovering over it, deeply under the water, I noticed some strange creature. It had the head of a bull, and a body like the mix of a fish and a turtle. It was enormous in size and laid there as if it was dead. So I dived down and it opened its eyes. It somehow seemed to know me, because it said, after such a long time we meet again. I apologized and explained that I did not know who he was, and he smiled and said, I had a very long time ago defeated him and threw him in this lake. But it was long ago, and he would bear no grudges, but was glad after so many eons of sleep I had woken him up again. And he also said he was no longer wild, but after this long sleep at peace with himself. I was very puzzled at what to think, and I felt a strange happiness seeing him again. Even though I fought and beat him long ago, apparently the regular feeling for a rival was appreciation. I did again not hear a comment if I had done right or wrong, but I got the impression I had reacted in the proper way with an old foe. By now the sun was low, and I knew my one day would soon end, and I saw a large family having trouble moving. They had so many things, but nobody was helping them, and they were threatened by the landlord to burn down their things if they did not take them out. So I decided to use my physical strength to help them get their things packed fast. I thought maybe that was a waste, spending my last hours as a demigod doing something so mundane. Maybe my father would see it as a waste, given the lecture about using my powers wisely and not waste it on fleeting mortal affairs. But at the end of the dream, when I asked him about that, he said he approved. Even though he himself would have done differently, my reasons were appropriate, since they were not done with the idea to do something great or make a real change, but just to momentarily ease the fate of some people. So the end was coming, and was back in the hallway from the start, a sort of transfer station between worlds, and I was expected a goodbye by a great number of beings, a few deities of other pantheons, though I had no relation to them. I wanted to say hello and goodbye, and some spirits and a group of fairies and so forth, and at the corner sat a sphinx. And Apollo told me she always answers the truth, but rarely her answers are useful. I should try that. She had big green eyes, which were always looking in different directions as she spoke, and so I asked, how can I become immortal? And she replied, you just have to continue to live. So I asked, how will I get some powers? And she answered, I have to be better than others. Apollo laughed. You see, she tells the truth, but rarely does it help. At least, not immediately. I enjoyed being farewelled by all these people, even though most I did not remember to know, but it seemed they had once known me. Then they said they would lead me to a farewell dinner, and I was a bit uneasy about it, thinking I did not wish to spend the last moment in some fancy dinner party. But in the next room all plates were with burgers and chicken wings and glasses of Coke, and I laughed, when they said, well, we all know what you like, so there it is. And we all ate of it plenty. At the end I was led to a corridor and Apollo halted. You have to go this way and pass the door. I cannot accompany you further. This path you must walk alone. I'm sorry that this is so, but you must endure this to the end before we can meet again. That too the threat of fate that is beyond us. You must endure what lies ahead. We shall meet again when you pass through the dark gate. And I knew what he meant. If you are wise, you will not tell anyone about this. It would be very reckless and bring you needless trouble. He paused and smiled. But then, being my son, avoiding trouble is likely not what you will do. But you know the ones you can tell. Do not ponder much about it. Just walk and make good choices. He smiled and patted on my shoulder, telling me it was time, so I walked through the corridor all alone, and came to a simple door which opened, and total blackness was behind it. It was very frightening, but I knew what I had to do, and I let myself fall into the darkness, and then I woke up.